Were you shocked that some of your Black feminist faves divested from liberation work and started going to Starbucks? Are you surprised that somebody that you don't know, but aligned yourself with, gave you their ass to kiss and or called attention to the fact that the pedestal that you put them on actually rested on your back? It's okay to be disappointed, but remember when I told y'all that you need to know people's politics and where they come from because at the very least it'll save you some time and maybe some money, and at the most it might save your life? So here we are. We're in this moment where these quote unquote Black feminists are saying, fuck all these other people and places. I am not really going to be about that life. And I think that that calls into question, right? What we actually think that influencers do. Influencers aren't organizers, right? Influencers can be activists. But if your involvement in liberation movements solely revolves around, right, what feels good to you, right, what feels aligned with whatever kind of wishes or hopes or dreams that you may have that aren't necessarily reflective of a collective liberation, right, then you are not participating in a liberation movement. So my content, right, is directed towards folks who are Black feminists, who consider themselves to be radical. I have written and talked about many critiques of Black radical movements in the 21st century. And one of the things that I think folks misunderstand is audience, right? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, like very briefly. First, I'm going to talk to the people who are outside of my audience, right? And I'm going to be clear about that. As a Black feminist, anarchist, abolitionist, someone who calls myself a radical, I guess, if I want to put a label on it, I'm going to speak to the liberals. And you might not know that you're a liberal. I'm finding in talking to people that a lot of folks don't actually know who they are or where they stand in movements. And so they think they're doing radical work when they're actually just maybe a little bit to the left of liberal. And you yourself might have been following people or pages or Black women who have called themselves radicals, who've called themselves participants in this liberation movement, who might actually espouse a more liberal ideology. But so I'm going to turn to you girlies who might be a little bit liberal and speak to you in this moment when everybody's trying to appeal to your grief around Kamala losing. And so what I'll say is, you cannot be mad that the system that you thought would save you functioned as it should. It's quite literally the function of voting, that whatever the majority says is what will happen. So the system isn't broken because Kamala lost, right? It's not broken because the Black woman that you wanted to be president didn't become president. That does not mean the system is broken. The system is working, right? And if we think about it in that way, right, we're actually thinking about it pretty similarly to what folks who were following Trump were saying 4 years ago, right? Didn't they say that 4 years ago that the election was stolen because Biden won, even though Biden won the popular vote, right? Even though Biden won the electoral college vote, right? Weren't they making these same arguments? I think the difference now, and I guess if I want to be a little facetious, right? The difference now between them and what I see y'all doing, right, is that the good guys are going to have tantrums and point fingers at other people on their side. They organized and they ensured that by hook, by crook, by vote, by whatever they wanted to happen, that Trump was going to be their candidate. And so we're doing this weird emotionally immature thing of trying to point out among the left, if folks are even, I don't know, some of these folks, some of the things they're saying, it's like, are you just part of the left, or are you just following trends on social media and calling yourself a social justice person? But that's neither here nor there. But when you turn around and say that other marginalized people that make up collectively less than 20%, 15% of voters, and you say it's their fault, and you say they should die, they deserve what's coming to them, they deserve, and you think that what's coming to them is also not coming to you because you make money or you have status, you really are highlighting a lot. So if we think about this, right, that is literally how voting functions. It is the majority wins. And so that's also part of the reason why white voters are so hell-bent on working within the system that their ancestors created, using their ancestral memory of lying, stealing, and other oppressive tactics to maintain a majority of the American population. Because the majority votes a certain way, then the majority gets what they need. So you're really talking about a system that's not geared towards meeting the needs of folks who are labeled as minorities in the first place, right? This is a system that was created that counted your enslaved ancestors as 3/5 of a person. I'm not exactly sure why in the hell anybody thinks that that would be the same system that would free them, right? This system is working exactly as it's designed. Like the prison system, like our education system, these systems are working as they're designed. They're not failing, right? These are literally tools of the state's coercive control that cannot meet your needs. And so I think one thing that we have to really think about, right, is the ways that we are, and I use a we broadly, just think about us as a collective, the lies that we tell ourselves, the self-betrayal that we continually participate in by participating in these systems, thinking that they're going to save us. And what's happening, right? What we're seeing with these people saying these really horrible things to other Black folks, what we're seeing is that people are saying these things, they are actually filled, right, with that resentment that comes with self-betrayal. Because that is what self-betrayal ultimately leads to. And folks are calling it grief. And I think that's a little bit of a misplacement, or maybe it's a bit of a pathological kindness, right? Someone who is cursing me because their candidate lost is not grieving. They're clearly bitter. They're clearly living in resentment because they made all of these small, unnecessary sacrifices and had all of these martyr moments that led them to this place where they are feeling broken, incomplete, and hurting. It's hard to recognize that the system that you thought would make you that special Negro actually sees you like everyone else. That up until this moment, right, you haven't actually professed to say that you see yourself as better than. And so I think of it kind of interestingly. It's like when you're in a toxic relationship, and I've been in plenty, so I kind of know this it's a little too intimately, but it's like when you're in this toxic relationship and your friends are like, you need to leave him, girl. You know, he ain't never gonna change. And of course, each time you capitulate, you say, okay, well, he didn't do it this time, but maybe next time. And, you betray yourself a little bit more. You stay in a relationship a little bit longer and he doesn't change, and you start to build that resentment, but you don't want to give it to the person who actually gave it to you, right? So you start cussing at your friends. You start treating your friends differently. And you get mad at them for even saying something or pointing to the truth, because it's not your fault that this person, this man, isn't changing. It's not your fault that you keep participating in prolonging the relationship. And so I think that's kind of similar to what's happening here. And I think nice folks would want to call it grieving. Maybe the real healers, and I'm saying this jokingly as a healer, but maybe the real healers, right, can see the grief underneath all of this. But The warrior in me is like, bitch, you are not grieving. You are just mad. You're just mad. You're mad at yourself and you're projecting. And so we see folks having all of these tantrums. Literally, I'm just going to call them tantrums. Because that is literally like, that's what I see, right? When you get online and start cussing people out, cussing Black people out, the people that you were supposedly in struggle with because of some shit that we literally don't have control over. I think these tantrums are reflective of just a few basic facts. First, basic facts, right? People are not really about it. Some of these women, some of these queer folks, some of these Black folks with money have been clout chasing. And they figured that the best way to do it would be to come through the activist lens, right? Pushes to position themselves as someone who knows what they're talking about and knows what it takes to get free. The other fact, right? You might have thought that you were the primary audience of these pages, and maybe you thought that Black people were at the center of these folks' lives, but now that they're out here cursing you out, now that they're out here making videos about all of the ways that they will never entertain white women again, you can realize that their content was actually for white people. Their lives revolve around white people. Their liberation work revolves around white people. And so it can be earth-shattering, it can be world-shifting, right? To realize that a person or a system that you put so much time and attention into doesn't actually give a fuck about you. And so what's happening with these folks, right, is that they are coming, I don't know, maybe again to the realization that white women don't care about Black liberation in the way that they would want us to believe, right? But that's obvious. That's always been the case, right? That's always been the case. The next fact is that folks aren't really doing whatever is necessary to educate themselves on what liberation actually involves, right? We have basically hooked our minds up to social media, right? If you can't teach me something in 2 to 3 minutes, then I don't need to know it, right? If I got to actually pick up a book and read it, I'm not about to do it. And folks are getting their liberatory education online and saying that this is enough, this is sufficient, but they're not actually doing the spiritual, emotional, and political work that is required to get free. You might have heard about what Rosa Parks did. You might have learned about what Ella Baker did from somebody's post and feel inspired, but that is not enough work to do what's required to actually liberate yourself and to participate in liberation movements. So folks aren't doing liberation work. They're actually doing the capitalist work of getting ahead. So to my folks who see themselves as radicals that are struggling for Black liberation, we have to do our part. And we cannot sit here and fret about the left behind that want to be left behind. We have to do our part and let people go. If folks want to go to Europe because they're done with the US, by all means, take your ass back to the literal center of colonial power. Okay? Because the truth of the matter is, we were doing the work without them anyway. They were never in community with us anyway. They didn't even see themselves as in community with us. Maybe they had a few moments of, yeah, I'm doing this for my people. But if white people are at the center of your lives and what you do, right, then you're not in the struggle for Black liberation. And I don't have a liberal mindset. Right? I don't believe that everybody should have a place in Black liberation and that everybody includes some Black people. We have to do the important work of knowing ourselves so that we can understand who our enemies are. If you don't know yourself, if you don't know what you believe, if you don't know what you stand for, then everybody's your friend, right? You have no enemies. But once you are committed to a principled struggle and you know what that principled struggle looks like, then you know who is in opposition to that and you move accordingly. And so folks are coming forward unprovoked to show us who they are. And either we can choose to believe them and reprioritize their position in our lives. And I'm using we really loosely because I don't know who any of these people who any of these people are. Like, I don't be following them. So I was like, oh, okay, this shit do not be crossing my timeline at all. But what I saw was truly horrifying. And so you have a choice, right? You don't have to follow these folks. You can reprioritize their position in your life. You can get off of social media. You can unfollow them. You can block them. You don't have to continue expending energy trying to evangelize them. And so this brings me to my other point about what's happening here. And this is part of my long form critique of how Black people do liberation movements and our inability to be reflexive about the work that we're doing. Because of the rhetoric around liberation, right? Whether that comes from radical Black liberation movements, liberal Black liberation movements, conservative Black civil rights movements, there's this unacknowledged Christian influence on our society, but particularly in how folks think about how liberation work actually functions and happens. And this is also a part of like how canvassing and organizing can function. Folks don't even realize that they're actually treating liberation work and organizing as mission work. You're putting out all these educational materials, knocking on people's proverbial doors and saying, hey, do you believe that Black people should be free? You go into the white neighborhoods, knocking on the door saying, do you believe you are the Black liberation witness, knocking on folks' doors, trying to convert people who don't believe in what you believe in to join you in the fight for your life. People who benefit from your life being nothing, being made akin to death, and you beating on their doors like the Mormons, trying to figure out how to get them to come to you. Yes, if that is what Black women are divesting from, then absolutely divest from wasting your time and energy beating the same old busted drum of educating your oppressors and hoping that one day it'll click. Yes, divest from that. Absolutely divest from that. Because that was not doing nothing anyway. That was not changing anything anyway. And even if we think about, right, how spiritual leaders in the past or how Lauren Olamina in Parable of the Sower even acted, right? The Bible of Black liberation that I'm pretty sure nobody actually really read. Y'all read it for the revelations aspect, right? You read it for the end of the world aspect. You might have picked up on some of the pieces of community, but actually didn't read how Lauren went about gathering folks for Earthseed. She was not out here going to everybody's door and saying, hey, the world is ending. Don't you want to join me here? The world is ending. You should educate yourself. Hey, by the way, have you read this book? Hey, by the way, do you know what so-and-so said at this talk? Hey, by the way, do you know? Because she knew that nobody would believe her. Nobody saw the prophetic vision that she had, that those walls were going to come down. And the one time that she did, she tried to bring her white friend into it. One time, her white friend betrayed her, and she got in trouble for knowing and seeing the truth. I think I actually have an understanding of what's happening here. And this is not meant to be an insult by any means, but just me trying to level things out here. We, now I'm using a collective we, have an overinflated sense of importance and scope in the minds of our oppressors. And so we have to actually decolonize our minds. We are not liberation evangelists. We are not civil rights evangelists. We are in a struggle, right? We're in a principled struggle for liberation that requires us to know who our enemies are and to move accordingly. We don't need to try to baptize our enemies in the truth that is that Black life matters. We don't need to try to baptize our enemies in the truth that liberation for the most marginalized Black person will make the world a better place. We just have to struggle for that liberation. What we're seeing, right, with these influencers or other folks on social media, right, is that they're out here evangelizing for liberation, but not actually struggling or studying for it. Because if you were struggling and studying for it, if you had an investment, a real investment in what was going on, first of all, you would know that going to Europe doesn't even make fucking sense. Second of all, you wouldn't be trying to up and leave. And so, yeah, hell yeah, I would be pissed too. I would be resentful too if I spent all my time trying to convert others who didn't want to lose their power and privilege and then get to also enjoy my labor and get to feel like better people because they know and they follow this Black woman who's taught them something new. And so I'm doing all of this work for them anyway. That is some folks' vision of how to get free. Doing more work for their oppressors. Because their oppressors, I guess, just don't know enough yet. And so if you thought that the work was educating white people on how they should be better, why? And it's like, girl, you thought Harriet Tubman was running around in a little dress and a silk press educating plantation owners on why she had to come and free their property? You thought she was like, oh yeah, no, I need to run off because this is white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal, harmful behavior. And if you don't change, then this is not going to end. No, bitch, the fuck? She spoke to the people and said, hey, you want to get free? You want to get free? I'm leaving here. I'm leaving now. This is what you need to do. This is how you need to prepare. We're leaving because our liberation is dependent upon whether or not our oppressors know that we need to be free. So again, did you think that Harriet Tubman was running around in a little dress and a silk press, educating plantation owners on why she had to run off with their property when she was bringing slaves to freedom? You don't get to make yourself, just speaking to my Black women here, see their sole role as educating, but you're really evangelizing. You don't get to make yourself anybody's mule and then be mad when they refuse to ride on your back to freedom. You definitely don't get the right to do that and then be mad at people who wasn't out there trying to shapeshift with you. Like, why? And for those of us who are struggling for freedom, right? We don't have the time to try to turn our oppressors into friends or allies. We trying to live. We trying to eat. We trying to train. We trying to study, fast, struggle, grow, read. And the other thing, right, that we all must realize and recognize, right, is that we don't need our oppressors to be just like us in order to exist. To think that you need to have a world that is reflective of you in order for you to be safely determined in it is a white supremacist, Christo-fascist form of thinking that relies on an understanding of the universal harmony and unity that is sameness, that is homogeneity, that is domination. And so this is the thinking that we have to decolonize, right? It's not just about being able to name something as white supremacy. It's not just about being able to say, oh, that's patriarchy. Not just able to say, oh, that's misogynoir. It's actually these beliefs that we have internalized as Black people that we don't think that we have enough power within ourselves to free ourselves. And that we have to spend our time and our energy trying to get people who literally want us dead or working until we're dead to get with the program. And so you and I, we all have to ask ourselves, right? If we truly believe that Black people have the power to free themselves. And if the answer is no, then honey, by all means, get your Starbucks, get your McDonald's, because that is the pinnacle of freedom, having food that doesn't decompose, eating food that doesn't decompose. Okay, by all means, do that. You don't think that Black people can free themselves, right? You don't think that you have the power to free yourself. You're willing to give that power to someone you don't know, to someone who benefits from you believing in your own position of marginalization as right, as just. But for others of us, we have to decide if we believe in our own goodness enough to build a world where we can safely self-determine, where we can safely live in joy for ourselves, with ourselves, and maybe by ourselves. Once we build that vision and do the work to make that vision so attractive, right? Those who are supporters, those who will fight with us, will join us. Evangelizing won't have to be the work that we do. We'll be living the life, right? So I want to ask you, do you believe in your own goodness enough to be in principled, loving community with others? Or do you believe that you have to work to make others who don't love you be in community with you? Do you not believe in your own goodness enough to do that work? And so I think in a future video, I'll talk more about the difference between a Black feminist, Afrocentric concept of the self in community with others, right? Which doesn't dissolve you as a being, right, as a separate entity, but actually connects you to community, versus the white supremacist, Christo-fascist, capitalist individual that is separate from community, that pulls themselves up by their own bootstraps, that demonizes but explicitly relies on feminized labor. So we'll talk about that in a separate video. But I want to ask you, which one of these do you think builds better, more comprehensive, more self-determinative, right, movements? But back to the divesting, right? Because I do think that there's a little kernel, a little piece in that, right? I wonder what our liberation movements would look like if Black women, Black trans women, Black queer women, Black cis women, Black women in general, Black non-binary folks, folks who are about liberation, who are really about it, decided to pour all of the energy that they use to educate their enemies, to evangelize their enemies into themselves and into our aligned communities. We stop shape-shifting into mules and then being mad when people don't want to use us, or they use us in ways that benefit them, but not in the ways that we assume shape-shifting into a mule will make us. And we really started to pour into ourselves and make sure that we are self-sufficient. We really believed in the ability of Black people to save ourselves. We would approach liberation differently. We would approach solidarity differently. We would approach dealing with our oppressors differently, right? From this kind of place of muledom, of martyrdom, where we're saying things like, I am not whole, and I need you to complete me in order to exist. We're turning to our oppressors, or folks that are just not aligned with our movements, pouring ourselves out, burning our own selves up, and saying, I need you to live. Won't you pour that water on me? That's within reach for both of us. What if we shifted from that to a self-sufficient, a self-supportive, a self-determinant place of power that says, I'm already living. I'm already whole. I just need you to see me, to respect me, and to know me in the way that you need to know me so that we can exist together. We don't have to be the same. You don't complete me, right? So I don't need you to participate in my life in a certain way. I just need you to recognize my boundaries so that we can coexist. I know some of the folks are like, well, what about the people that want to hurt us? So part of being self-determined, self-determinate, self-sufficient, right, is learning how to protect yourself and being willing to do so by any means necessary. Versus a pacifist, I'm willing to sacrifice myself so that the person who wants to kill me might learn a lesson. But actually saying, actually, no, my life matters. I fucking matter. So I'm going to do everything I can to preserve myself. And once you get to that point, right, you realize that you can exist even with those who choose to hate you. So what this time, if we allow it, right, if we can move past the shock, move past whatever fuck people got going on, what it can teach us is who we are and what we truly need to survive and to fight. Or we can continue to grieve and be resentful about a past in which we were always already marginalized and oppressed. We can continue to try to find ways to blame ourselves and each other for a world that never existed. And so I'll just end with this. If you are really about it, please just delete people. Just start deleting them. You're not disposing of them. You are cultivating your community. Delete them because they cursed you anyway, right? Let them go. Recommit to your own practice of study and struggle, right? Release the liberation evangelist in you and build true community with others. These are folks who are going to support you, who are going to be aligned with you in struggle. And you don't always have to agree on everything, but at the very least, you know you're not trying to educate, evangelize, and convert your enemies, right? And last but not least, always assess the source of your information because it's up to you to free yourself.